Welcome to today's webinar, A Tale of Two CRAs, How Community Redevelopment Agencies Can Help Florida Implement Healthy Community Strategies. The webinar is brought to you by Open Architecture Collaborative and the AIA Housing Knowledge Community and EDI International. I'm Steve Schreiber, and I'm the moderator for this webinar, for which you AIA members and registered architects will earn 1 hour of learning units. Today's presenter is Choli Aronson, who recently relocated from Florida to Charlotte, North Carolina, where she works for Overcash Demmitt Architects as a project manager. For the last 12 years, she worked in Delray Beach, Florida, on a variety of different projects, including government buildings, urban redevelopment projects, multifamily housing, parking structures, etc. She also served for 8 years as a commissioner of the Delray Beach Housing Authority, whose mission was to bring affordable housing to South Florida. These are some of the learning objectives for this webinar. You'll learn about the Community Redevelopment Agency and its supporting role in building healthy communities. Choli will discuss how traditional funding models are encouraging outdated models in public housing. She'll discuss CRA's roles in eliminating blight and the effect of health on the surrounding communities. And she'll describe new trends in public housing development and the challenges it presents. This is a much longer course description, so rather than read this to you, I'll just keep this on the screen for a few seconds for you to glance at that. So logistics, we do encourage questions throughout the presentation. So there's two types of questions. There are technical questions you can't hear. There's some problem with the webinar itself. We'll try to answer those as we go along. And then content-related questions related to Choli's presentation will be answered during the question and answer session towards the end of the webinar. So this is our copyright materials information. And our compliance statement. So with that, please join me in welcoming Choli Aronson.
Hi.
There we go.
So hopefully everyone should be able to see my presentation at this point. My name is, again, Choli Aronson, and I wanted to show you a difference between two different implementations of the CRA model in two different communities in Florida and what influence that has on developing healthy communities. So what is a CRA? A CRA is a legislative mechanism that allows taxes from a blighted slum area to be diverted from the city fund and actually fund the redevelopment within those blighted areas. One of the things that mechanism does is it sets a baseline excuse me, for when the program starts, and money that comes in prior to that goes to the city at that level, and money that comes in after that baseline time from that area gets funneled into the CRA system and is then reinvested into that area to allow for further redevelopment. So I've got two very different areas to talk about, but one of the main things that CRAs are able to do is they can amalgamate different properties, take a longer view look at these blighted areas, and compile properties into larger areas that larger projects can go and be developed in. You can take on these major projects, do planning that developers don't intend to do, and in areas where it's very difficult to get a developer in, it really can help spark that private investment. It also leverages funding from other sources. They do rely on professional architects and planners and engineers for the service, but they can really take that more long-term look that a developer cannot take. So the two different communities that we're going to look at, one is the Westgate Belvedere homes, and this is in an area of unincorporated Palm Beach County, and then in Delray Beach, which is a much larger area, about 16 square miles, and it's located directly on the Atlantic Ocean. Delray Beach, you can see the population statistics. It's an urban population, and currently it's doing much better than the median as far as what Florida on average is. That was not the case at the beginning of this, and this is a huge success story for the CRA model. The CRA district is predominantly directly downtown in Delray Beach. It is approximately 2,000 square feet, or 2,000 acre, a fifth of the city. And their area was created in 1985. So that is the baseline year for the taxation. 22,000 approximate population. Both of these CRAs are governed by 7-member volunteer boards. And that tax process that I was talking about is the tax increment financing. That's their primary revenues. The Westgate Belvedere homes is a much smaller area. It was established at a later time. But you can also see this is a much poorer area. They are much lower than the mean or median income and home value than the rest of the state of Florida. So two very different models. The biggest thing that CRAs can allow for that a developer model cannot allow for is looking at more infrastructure. One of the biggest problems in the Westgate CRA area is that this is not an area that developers would necessarily go into, and that it needs a lot of infrastructure help. This area was damaged during Hurricane Wilma. There's a lot of flooding going on, and those are things that developers are generally not going to come into this neighborhood and fix these. So a CRA plan was set up, and you can see these are the different missions of the CRAs. They do have similar goals. In Westgate, the idea is to make a vibrant urban village, really spur on economic growth. And in Delray Beach, on the left-hand side, to foster and directly assist in the redevelopment of the area to eliminate blight. So it's a much more urban concept. You can see the funding availability. So Delray Beach, definitely much bigger area, much more funding to work with. Westgate, much lower amount of funding. That would be that TIF total. So the big thing that happened in Westgate was trying to do the sewer infrastructure and the infill affordable housing. They did a drainage study in 2003 and really looked at this need for water storage for protection from the flooding that really destroyed this area. There's a series of existing canals that could be widened, new lakes proposed, trying to get this area to stop flooding in the future, because that flooding and stagnant water creates a significant public safety and public health crisis in that area. The other thing is there's a number of derelict or abandoned houses in this area, and there was an area that really was used for illegal dumping. So what the CRA is very good at is assembling land, as I said before. So one of the things that the CRA could do was assemble this almost 8 acres of land. Part of the other thing that happens is you can get structures donated or voluntary sellers, and the CRA can buy up those lands. There was no displacement of any of the residents. They were all voluntary. So the phase 1 and 2 that was completed in 2012, you can see that created a pre-treatment area with literal plantings, wildlife habitats, and this really helped to fix a lot of the flooding problems in this area, in addition to doing the native vegetation and creating more of a wildlife habitat. The third phase was an EcoArt component, and this was one of the additional ways that CRAs can help. There's a lot of funding that is available to other governmental agencies, cities, things of that nature, that as a CRA, the community can put together responses and requests for grants and things of that nature. So this EcoArt component was something that was done as a grant through a different outside governmental organization. And they do a lot of water quality monitoring and education programs, but it also helps with the flooding situation in that area. So you can look at some of the information about what this, the CRA provided. So the $450,000 was used to sort of as seed money to leverage the cost of this to get additional grants. You can see there's a community block grant money. There's money from the county, in addition to other money that's gone through because of the damage from Hurricane Wilma. A lot of the benefits to the community here that this money provided, additional stormwater storage capacity, these community amenities, wildlife monitoring, things of that nature. It also did a lot of local job creation, which is one of the missions of the CRA, is to really stimulate the economy in these areas. And it led to areas where there were artificial reefs created, and also provides this ecotourism. So some of the things that you have to keep in mind, this area was predominantly older houses on septic systems, and when this area floods, we get standing water mixed in with the drain fields, so we get a lot of health risks due to that mixing of sewage and floodwaters. So 500 single-family dwellings were changed from septic to sewer, and this again was funded by a community development block grant. And this is the disaster recovery based on the damage from Hurricane Wilma. Just some of the publicity that this brought to the city and to the area. So 182 mobile units were destroyed in Hurricane Wilma, and one of the things that CRAs are very good at is doing these public-private nonprofits. And the partnerships between the public and the private. So there was a number of different organizations that were involved: Palm Beach County, Florida Community Loan Fund, Neighborhood Renaissance Programs, and that really, that public-private partnership then applied for these funds that are not something that a developer or a homeowner would really be able to have the resources to do. And that helps then fund this kind of redevelopment. Again, with the land assemblages and acquisitions, they were able to build 11 3- and 4-bedroom single-family homes on scattered sites throughout this neighborhood to fill in those derelict properties as well. A little bit more information on this tax incremental financing. It's not an additional tax, as I stated before. So for Delray Beach, 1985 is the base tax year. The city receives all the revenues based on 1985, plus 5% of the increased revenues of everywhere. And then the CRA receives 95% of the tax revenues that accrue from the increase from the work that they had done. And one of the things that really helps, you can see in 1985, the tax rolls were $250 million. In 2015, they were $1.56 billion. So this redevelopment really did spur the economic growth in Delray Beach, and it really did help reinvigorate the entire city. Now, this does bring up some challenges because the city sees that the CRA district is the only area in town that's really making this huge profit, and the cities frequently will want to try and capture that profit for themselves in a variety of ways. And there is a difficulty in Florida because of that, because there's a lot of challenging as to when that money should revert back to the city. A lot of CRA districts are supposed to phase out, I believe, after 20 years. The one in Delray Beach has lasted longer than that. And there also is a movement to just phase them out completely. However, I think you can see from this example, it is certain that this has been very beneficial for the city of Delray Beach, and it helps keep that money in areas that really need to be protected and need to be redeveloped due to blight. So let's look a little bit at Delray Beach. This is the 30-year timeline of projects that have been done by the city of Delray Beach CRA district, and they really have had their hand in a lot of different pieces all over downtown, which really there's a piece that connects I-95 through all the way to the ocean that is downtown. About half of that area to date has been redeveloped with CRA money, and the other half, the half that's closest to I-95, furthest away from the ocean, is the area that they are particularly focusing on currently. Series of redevelopment plans, planning for how the lower income blighted areas do not get gentrified out of existence so that people can continue to stay within their neighborhoods, within their towns in Delray Beach. Some of the things that were done, here's a West Settlers building. This was a rehab of a historic structure. 3 affordable rental condos, 2 ground floor commercial condos. You can see the architect there. And really, the CRA funded a lot of projects where they go into neighborhoods. This is in a historically black or African-American neighborhood in Delray Beach that had a lot of historical significance, and took the old derelict building, rehabilitated it, that then spurs on more economic growth in that area, but also provides these affordable residential units to allow for people who have their support systems in this area to stay in this area. They also do a lot of work with Habitat for Humanity. These CODA units or something else, the land was assembled for these units in partnership with Delray Beach Community Land Trust. Well, let's see if I can get my slides to advance. There we go. Some of the other creative things that the CRA is able to do that traditional funding models may not be able to do. This is a construction academy. So as properties become available, the CRA acquires them at relatively low cost. They're donated, something of that nature. And they've set up this program with the local high school to allow students to learn construction technologies. So they have come into these areas, buildings are designed, kids are out there working on them, taught how to build buildings, and then this unique partnership really gives students that job experience so that they then can go on with skills once they graduate to work on construction sites. So not only is it providing affordable single-family housing within the CRA district and this community development block grant neighborhood, but they are also teaching students job skills that they can then go on to use after graduation. They start in drafting classes, they learn how to design single-family homes, they work with architects, and then they work with construction trades after they graduate or also while they're in school. Some of the other things they're learning is new energy efficient green technologies. So a lot of these houses are being built in that way to work on keeping utilities bills low for home residents, and also to teach these students a lot of the newer technologies that we are putting into our buildings. And you can see the third house is in the design stage at this point, but there are other programs like this throughout the country. And one of the benefits of the redevelopment agencies is this is a funding mechanism that is not standard for this kind of construction. So here are some additional projects that the CRA has funded, and CRA has had a long-standing partnership with the Delray Beach Housing Authority the Housing Authority is traditionally funded by HUD, and because of that, over the years we have seen that HUD funding is reducing frequently. They went through a very large reduction due to sequestration, and the funds are really uncertain as the future continues. So the CRA has been working very heavily with the Delray Beach Housing Authority to try and support them and help them learn how to leverage their own money so that they're not as dependent on the federal government and on the HUD system. One of the first projects that they did together was this LaFrance Apartments, and what ended up happening, the CRA owns the property. It was a hotel in the historic African American neighborhood, so it was something that really had a lot of historical significance, wanted to be maintained in that area. And so the CRA hired an architect to redevelop it, and then they turned that project over for the Delray Beach Housing Authority to manage. So this gave the Housing Authority property management experience. They already had property management experience from running public housing. However, in this situation, they started working on a more commercial property management experience to build up a portfolio of property management so that they could have an additional source of income. As far as how this works for healthy communities, this really starts kicking off renovation of a blighted area. It was one of the first projects in this area. And it allows for senior housing, which this is a senior housing project, to allow seniors to continue to live in their downtown, in their community, with their support network in place in a very walkable area so that they are not cut off from the community. So in terms of the way we're trying to work on affordable housing, that we need to look at the needs of the people that are in those areas. And one of the things here is not necessarily having access to cars. We need to make sure that we can preserve them within a location that is walkable, and also to keep them close to their existing support network and not separate them. So here's just some additional pictures of that area. So one of the next things that the Housing Authority worked with the CRA was the West Settlers Service Center. So this houses not only the offices of the Delray Beach Housing Authority, but on the upper levels there are 3 public housing units. So the land was donated by the CRA, and the CRA did renovations to the alley. They did a whole parking agreement for the entire neighborhood. That's not something that a developer or a traditional single property owner would be able to do, but this is something that as a more encompassing district-wide authority, they have that ability to do that. And then the CRA, because they had the land as equity, was able to then go out and get traditional construction financing. So here's just another way that the CRA is supporting the Housing Authority in their goals and in leveraging their funds. Some of the healthy steps here, again, this is in the same blighted area, the historic African American commercial core. We're looking at having retail and office on the ground floor, which is what you're seeing here, the offices for the Housing Authority, with the units above. Now these are very different units. These are targeted for grandparent raising grandchildren units, programs for non-nuclear families. And they come up with some very different design situations that you need to think about when you don't necessarily have an able-bodied person or adult in those units. So you really do need to think about the heights of counters and cabinets and access and having them directly above the Housing Authority offices as public housing units means that there's easy access to maintenance staff, easy access to a support structure for those people. One of the problems with grandparents raising grandchildren units is that's not a program that's really HUD necessarily appropriate all the time. And one of the things that we have to start looking at in these changing times is as a child hits 18, they age out of the system, and they're not necessarily allowed to be living with their grandparents necessarily. So it brings up some problems for HUD-funded projects and how these projects can be financed so that we can provide these needed public housing options, but outside of the traditional HUD system. Another project that went into a lot of public-private partnerships between the CRA and the Housing Authority was formerly what was called Carver States. This was a very traditional project in the housing HUD terms, and it was basically decimated by Hurricane Wilma. And after Hurricane Wilma, the whole thing was needed to be demolished, and all of the residents were placed into the Section 8 program. What that did is it left a very large chunk of land that the Housing Authority owned, and that was needed to be redeveloped. However, the city did not want this redeveloped as a traditional HUD project, did not want that concentration of low-income families, and were very wary that it would turn back into exactly what this Carver Estates piece had been. So this project worked with the CRA, had a number of community design charrettes to look at what the community thought would be good on this site, identify needs, and then try and figure out how to do those funding mechanisms to help get to where the community wanted. So this is it was a 200 unit public housing complex, and it was condemned. And then you can see what the community, the CRA and the Housing Authority came up with was doing 3 different phases. Phase 1 is 144 low-income tax credit rental units. So those are tax credit units. And phase 2 is an 84 low-income elderly unit completely, which is now actually constructed. It wasn't at the time of this photo. And then phase 3 is looked at as a 30 affordable for sale single family and duplex units. That's what we had originally looked at with them. And then as things are changing, the idea now is to look at it as a for sale townhouse development, just trying to hit a little bit more density because the need for affordable housing in this area is just so great. But one of the main things here is to try and integrate that phase 3 block into the neighborhood. You can see to the right of it, there's single family development there also. And so we didn't want to create just another apartment building there. The other thing is to try and make affordable for sale units. The CRA's partnership with the Community Land Trust comes into play, and trying to use the land trust model where the Housing Authority will continue, or the land trust will continue to own the land and will only sell the buildings themselves. That allows more control over the fact that those will always stay affordable units, because that gives control over who those units are sold to after the fact, as well as the fact that it just dramatically decreases the cost of the for sale unit to the owner, because they are not buying the land as well. So here's some of the items that you can see. You can see the 144 unit multifamily, and one of the main things here is it needed to be a multifamily. They wanted to make it a mixed income. However, with the tax credit, it did have to be mostly low income, but we are trying to provide, by the 3 different sites, a variety of housing situations. The CRA provided $1 million in infrastructure and roadway funding to help attract the private partner for the Housing Authority. So that was the way that CRA could leverage their money to help the Housing Authority attract a private partner. Roundstone Development was selected, and the thing that happens here is that due to this private-public partnership, the Housing Authority has now been able to work with and become property managers for this property as well. Although they were the owner, that doesn't necessarily mean that the developer would want them to be the property manager. But with the CRA's help and previous property managing experience, they've now are property managing this as well and getting a portion of the revenue for property managing to fund additional projects to provide low-income housing. And then the last one I wanted to highlight was the Lakes of Delray apartment, and this is one where the CRA was not involved at all. So we moved from a situation where the CRA was owning the land, operating the land, and just letting the housing authority manage it just to get a little income and a little experience, to giving them the land so that they could get a traditional partner and property manage, or a traditional loan and property manage, to one where the housing authority owned the land, but the CRA provided some infrastructure improvements to help attract a private partner, and then the housing authority could property manage, to this one where the housing authority was solicited specifically to property manage this community. So this is a 55 and older community. It already had 200 project-based Section 8 units that were funded through the housing authority. And a partner was sought and bought the property with the housing Delray Beach Housing Group, which is the an arm of the housing authority, as the property manager. So through the property management and the private development opportunities fostered by the CRA, the housing authority has been able to increase their property management portfolio and is now able to lessen their dependency on HUD. So, you know, this is, I think, one of the biggest success stories of the CRA is their ability to help various agencies learn how to take their money, leverage it into something else, leverage it into different experiences, so that they can then continue on without the financial assistance necessarily of the housing authority, but in a much better, of the CRA, but in a much better position so that they can then further their own mission. Some of the outcomes of the CRA district in Delray Beach, you can see the commercial rents on Atlantic Avenue increased tenfold from $6 to $8 a square foot to a range of 60 to 90. And actually that's becoming even more extreme in the heart of downtown, somewhere up into $150 a square foot for the most desirable locations. The commercial vacancy rate decreased from 35 down to approximately 5%. You can see approximately 130 restaurants, 20 art galleries, more than 2,000 residential units and 400 hotel rooms approved, new affordable units created, and an active nightlife and cultural scene. So that's really all I've got for the presentation, and I am happy to take whatever questions there are.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I was on mute. So a number of questions did come in during your excellent presentation. So the first question was, and please, if you're out there listening, please do keep sending those questions in. So the first question that came in was, are there set-aside funding mechanisms to allow for or cover the long-term maintenance and eventual capital replacement of placed new infrastructure, wetlands created, et cetera?
You know, one of the things with the CRA funding is because they have that TIF money, they get any money, you know, on a taxation basis, and a portion of that money gets devoted to maintenance of their existing buildings and existing facilities. So that would be the mechanism, is using, you know, part of their budget for that maintenance.
Wonderful. Let's see, another question is, for the high school involvement, was the ACE mentor program of the West Palm Beach included, or was that used?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that one?
I'm sorry, yeah. You were talking about the high school program where students were designing buildings on vacant lots. Was the ACE mentorship program of West Palm Beach involved? Do you know?
No, I don't believe it was. I believe this was a fairly specific program just with the local high school.
let's see, moving on down. The program seems to be pointing out some of the failings in the traditional support system, HUD, et cetera. Do you think that these traditional systems need to be redefined and updated to work with modern needs?
I think that they definitely do. I think one of the biggest things that we're seeing in the market is needs for non-traditional HUD solutions. One of the big challenges in HUD housing is, unfortunately, if there's any amount of drug use within the unit, within the family, those people are immediately removed from HUD housing, and we've seen that causes a lot of problems. There are a number of places where they're trying a housing first strategy where, regardless of whatever problems the resident has, they continue to maintain their housing and then provide support for their secondary problems, where we're dealing with homelessness as the primary problem. And those seem to be facing a lot more successful outcomes at this point. Now, it's still a very new set of programs. The other thing is we're finding that there are a lot more places where grandparents are raising grandchildren, and when they do reach 18 and they're aging out of the ability to live with their grandparents because they're not the correct familial relationship, that does become a big problem as well. In addition, HUD, as I said, that the Village Square project, they really wanted that to be a mixed income community because of the benefits that we're seeing with people having role models from different incomes, and because it doesn't stigmatize the residents of that neighborhood, which then causes other problems. The HUD model and the Florida tax credit model does not really allow for a way to do a mixed income community, and so a lot of places are doing additional ways of doing things. Delray Beach, for example, has a low, I'm trying to think of the word, but they have an affordable housing model as well, where they will give you certain benefits to your density or your height if you provide workforce housing, is what they're calling it, and that allows for more housing to be interspersed throughout another community that the developer then can take advantage of. So I think there's a lot of changes to the system that need to be made to discourage the old style project development into a more modern urban setting, and into a setting that we understand now creates better outcomes for those people that are living in low-income housing.
Interesting. What about LEED certification? Are any of the projects that you worked on seeking LEED certification?
A lot of them are not LEED certified, just because of the cost of the USGBC system. Generally, they are working to incorporate a lot of LEED theories and LEED technologies. One of the best things we can do for people that are living in our affordable housing is to make sure that they are energy efficient, so that they don't have the additional burden of paying for the utilities. Now, in public housing, they do get a utility allowance. So if we can make those more and more efficient, it just reduces the cost for everyone involved. But because of the cost of the USGBC registration system, it is becoming a little bit difficult. Now, I do know that the West Settlers office building is a LEED building, and that was a very successfully done project. They did a lot of reclaimed lumber, a lot of technologies of that nature, and the Housing Authority is very proud of the fact that that is I'm pretty sure it's LEED. The other thing that we're seeing is that the use of global green, because of its decreased cost, is a very popular strategy, but really it's trying to encourage those green technologies that we're seeing as being much more important. Now also in Florida, any project that has public funding is required to follow one of the green technologies programs, but it does not have to be LEED.
Interesting. And so tagged onto that question was the encouragement, does the program encouragement the reuse of structures?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one again?
Does it encourage the reusing of structures? You know,
well, and you know,
renovation. Yeah. Go
yeah,
ahead.
that is one of the things that the CRA does have a very strong ability to do, where a traditional developer may not, is to go into a blighted area, see structures that need some fairly significant renovation, remodel, but understand that it is more cost effective to reuse them, remodel them, and put them out there. Even if it is significant. I know the CRA in Delray Beach actually recently did something on a non-housing basis, took a warehouse and turned it into artist studios. Very creative use of a building. And they have that ability to do it because we're not looking for that developer quick turn a profit model, and they can really look a little bit longer term at what is a necessity in the community, and because it does allow for some more creative uses of structures.
Oh, interesting. So you know, just before the webinar started, you were talking about the fact that you had just relocated from Delray Beach to Charlotte. And I was just wondering if you can talk about what you're doing now and whether or not you'll continue doing this kind of work.
Well, one of the things that we're looking at doing, I'm working for a company that really is trying to get into more multifamily, and one of the things that we've talked about right now, they are doing hotel development, and there is a strong push to try and figure out how to get either more derelict hotels or hotels that need to be remodeled into affordable housing models. There's a number of places where older hotels are being retooled and redeveloped into affordable housing. And because it's a very similar construction model and it's a very similar style, so to speak. And so we're trying to look for opportunities to convince our developers to, instead of remodeling into hotels, perhaps remodeling into affordable housing. Huge need in the Charlotte area for affordable housing, huge need just in the southeast in general for affordable housing. So that's really where we're looking to push and try and go into that route, is looking at, you know, hotel development and affordable housing development as a similar style of development. And they have very similar sort of cost for development, where it needs to be very, very cost effective.
Choli, if I may, what advice, because we have a lot of architects in the audience, what advice would you give for an architect that would like to, you know, take advantage of some of the lessons that you've just shared, but there might not be community redevelopment agency or anything of the like locally? What kind of steps could they take?
Well, I think one of the biggest things that I found is doing volunteer work for Habitat for Humanity is also always very valuable. It helps you get you into that community of people that are doing this. Volunteer work for the Housing Authority. Most cities, even most small areas, have housing authorities that do their public housing programs, and that's really how I got involved in this, is being a volunteer on the Housing Authority. It really keys you into what's going on in the community. Some of the projects, then you get to work on the owner side, which is actually a very valuable experience to try and figure out what really the needs are, what the community would benefit from, because every community is different in a lot of regards, and what those community needs are going to vary based on where you are. Florida has a very specific set of types of residents, in addition to types of structures that need to be built. And volunteering for those housing authorities, in my opinion, are one of the best ways to really understand what the problems are in your community and where the best places that as an architect we can help, because they're in the business of building housing for people. And so that's a place that we can really put our volunteer efforts to, biggest bang for the buck.
Let's say another question that's come in over the wires. Is it the creative mixed use and willingness to allow for more creative structures or housing types that make the project successful?
I think it is. I think, the more creative we can get with how the types of units we're providing, the more flexibility of units that we're providing, not to sound cliche, but it takes all sorts, right? It takes all kinds of people. And so there's a lot of different needs out there. And a lot of different solutions that need to happen to make the community work. In the solutions in Delray Beach are completely different from the solutions in Westgate, just based on what those needs were and the different types of people that are occupying those locations. And I think that level of creativity and the creative solutions, whether it's a mixed use with retail on the ground floor and housing above, or whether it's doing just strict single family, or there's motor court development now that's going on where they're sharing parking because they don't really have the need for the parking. That kind of thing. I mean, there's now also shipping container buildings that we're seeing, and I think just part of the excitement of it is that we get to see all these creative things and be part of these new creative solutions. But it also, a lot of them can help bring the cost down and make them more affordable. And I think that's really what is leading to the success of this style of housing.
Nice. And then attached to that question was, should local zoning codes begin to require this kind of thinking outside the box?
I think it really needs to. I mean, I think some of the biggest problems that we're seeing in Florida, at least, is the absurd requirements for parking that are going on. And that's all based on local zoning code with very little regard for the type of people that will be occupying these units. Florida, everything, well, architecture in general, everything is driven by the amount of parking that you can fit on the site, and that is fundamentally determined by zoning codes. But also when you're starting to look at things like shipping container buildings or tiny houses, which I know they're doing for low-income housing in the Pacific Northwest, those in many places are not legal by the local zoning codes. And until the local zoning codes are challenged and allow for that, we can't even explore some of the options that we have available to us. So it really does need to move along with the development.
And some being an ex-Floridian myself, Florida also has this sort of crazy quilt of autonomous cities and towns, like in the area that you're describing. Like north of Delray Beach, there's a community that's 100% mobile homes. That's its own, it's its own government. So without sort of a regional approach, also,
it does.
It's hard to move the needle.
It is, yeah, very.
So, we are running towards the end of our time for this this presentation. So this is a part where I have a few closing comments. The most important one, which is to thank you very much for the really the wonderful presentation. And then
well, thank you. I very much enjoyed it.
Yeah, well, thanks. And for those of you at home or at your offices, this concludes this AIA Continuing Education System course. There will be a webinar survey report that will be sent to you in an email in the next hour. So report credit for all attendees. So some of you watch this as a group around a single computer or a monitor. So everyone there, your credit needs to get reported through that survey by Friday of this week. So you basically have 4 days to do it. And then we encourage you to find out other AIA webinar offerings at network.aia.org/events/webinars, or just Google AIA webinars. And follow us on social media. through Twitter at OpenArc Collab and at AI Housing KC, and then Facebook OpenArc Collab. So once again, thank you very much to Choli, and thank you very much to Garrett, who's a voice you just heard, who's the behind-the-scenes master of this webinar. So normally these webinars are on the first Monday of the month, of every month, so stay tuned for the next webinar of the 2018 series. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.